Dorothea Hendriks here, your coach in public speaking and in presentation skills. Today, I have a very special, well, all my guests are special, but today, particularly so, Carol Tulpar. Carol Tulpar, she's a blogger, a poet, a lover of words, an award recipient, and a writer who has a passion for history, especially World War II. She has just completed Unspoken History, which is the first in a series. She's doing a trilogy. The second book, which she's in the throes of editing, Habit of Secrecy, will soon be polished and complete. And she's ready to wrap up her third this fall, Secret Listener, which is the third in a series of her trilogy. And it's called the Secret Trilogy. So right now, none other than Carol Tulpar. Hi, Carol. How are you?
Hi, good morning, Dorothea. It is still morning, isn't it? Yes.
It is morning, yes. Yeah, I have a number of questions for you, Carol. And the very first one that I've got here on the list is, at what point in your life did you decide you wanted to write? You wanted to be a writer?
Probably I was about 7. I climbed up above the door and on a chair. I used to like to climb up on chairs as a kid. And I looked over the door so that nobody could see that I was watching. And I watched my family members talking. And I don't know if I actually wrote down what they said, but then I came down and I reported, "This is what you said," very smugly to them, and gave them back their dialogue, and they were stunned.
And that was the moment when you thought, oh, this is fun?
No, I thought, I'm going to write, one day I'll be a novelist, I said to myself.
Oh, how cool is that? So now you're in the process of writing. And so what do you write about? Like, where do your ideas come from? How do you know what you want to write about?
Oh gosh, that's yeah, I don't know, but you get assigned them. I have to quote here somebody I've been reading recently. Janine Cummins wrote a book called American Dirt. I just finished reading that yesterday, and it's about a Mexican woman who escapes after her journalist husband is killed by the cartels in Acapulco. And Janine, who is an American, although she's descended from Puerto Ricans, she said she told someone she felt compelled but unqualified to write about this other country where she has never lived, and things she has not experienced. And I felt it really captured my feeling about the book I'm working on now, because I'm writing about, the book I just finished is about the Irish Troubles. And I don't really know very much, like at a practical level. I've studied it, I've researched it massively, but why did I have to write about that, But that's the one that I have to write about. So them above, whoever they may be, have assigned it to me, and I can't go up there and tell them the dog ate my homework. I've got to get it done,
So somewhere this little kernel, this something came to write about I don't know, the Irish conflict, just.
No, actually, it was more circuitous than that, because I began writing with the book called Habit of Secrecy, which is set in Camrose, Alberta, and Edmonton, and then in London. And this is about a nurse who's uncertain of the parentage of her eldest daughter. And when she quickly marries after, a brief but disastrous love affair in London, she does not tell her future husband that she may be pregnant, and she never tells them, and they never talk about it. So she carries this secret. And then when her aunt dies, she finds out the aunt also had many secrets, one of which that she was a translator at Bletchley Park during the war, and such people never spoke about that. But I had a problem with Caroline's British boyfriend. He was a very good man. He was a surgeon at Bart's Hospital, and I could never understand, even when I finished the book, why did he suddenly leave her? Like, why? And then after a while, I started to write Simon's story, and I was like, I know why he left her. It's because of the Irish Troubles. So then, we got back to the grandmother in Dublin, and then we got back to what happened in Belfast all those years ago. And that was that story, which had to be written in order to explain something that happened in the other story, which was finished, but not quite finished, because the motivation for Simon to leave her just wasn't there. So, yeah.
It almost sounds to me like you've got these little voices in your head that take you in one direction. And then when you're in that direction, all of a sudden there's something unfinished and you move off into another direction.
Well,
But
yeah, it is. It's a bit confusing, but I was working on Simon years and years ago, and I decided that Simon was an alcoholic and he had a car accident and all this kind of stuff. And Simon like spoke in my head very loud. He said, "I am not an alcoholic. This is not the way it was." I was like, okay. You have to listen up when they talk to you like that, when they get stern.
mm,
But
what?
it's as you work that you discover, right? You have
Yes.
to
Yeah.
you have to get into it before you can discover the next thing.
So sitting there waiting for inspiration is not the way to go. You actually have to
No,
come
you've
through.
got to jump in with both feet, which luckily has sort of been my approach to life anyway. Except I have to say, even at 18, I was like, yeah, I got to start writing novels, but first I have to get some experience. But God, I had no idea that that was going to be like, 5 decades of experience before I actually got the things done. But that's okay.
It's okay. You're there, you're here, and you're moving forward. Question here from, I know on your website you talk a bit about your personal life and what inspired you to write the Secret Trilogy. But can you share maybe a specific example of life of post-war rural, I guess, rural northern Alberta? And you mentioned DVA Farm. I'm not sure what that is. And you also mentioned having a veteran father. I don't have a veteran father. So how do those, having a veteran father, being on a DVA farm, how does that make it different, make your story different?
Well, that was the atmosphere of, small town post-war Canada. Most people lived in towns. The veterans who returned could either apply to go to university or they could apply to get a farm. Now, my father was already in his late 40s at this point. He was born in 1901, so he would have been 45. My parents married at the end of the war, just before VE Day, actually. They married in April of 45. And so he had to, make a living. He'd been kind of wandering around all over the place, in the dirty 30s, traveling around and bumming around. And he was up north, building a freight barge on Slave Lake and what have you. But at this point, he had to settle down. And so he got the farm through the Departments of Veterans Affairs. He got a farm. And that was kind of his settlement after the war, what the government gave the men to get on with their lives, kind of thing.
So what from that inspired you to write, to begin writing the story?
The stories, my father was always telling stories about the war. The men in the town were always drinking at the Legion, and like they had this weird bond. Nobody understood them. It's a syndrome of veterans. Nobody understands what they've gone through, except brothers in arms kind of thing. And my mother used to talk about him being an old vet. But on the other side of it, my mother was from the British heritage, but through Newfoundland. And so people used to talk about in whispers about things. Oh, she's not married to her husband, or they're shacked up together, or they've got skeletons in the closet, or she had a child out of wedlock. All this kind of stuff was secret, right? So there were so many things you could not talk about. So I lived through that era, and then we went into an era when everybody knew everything about everything was spilled out on the floor. So I just found that quite fascinating from the secrecy. And then of course I thought a lot about, and have thought a lot about, the toxic nature of secrecy, because secrecy was one of the things that kept the I'm talking now about Unspoken History, that kept the troubles going in Ireland. Whatever you say nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the police can't solve the crimes, and everybody's afraid to speak out because they will be punished by the paramilitaries if they speak out and help.
Mm-hmm. So in going through, as you were doing your research, and you've got 3 books here, but as you were doing your research for this series, was there one thing that just absolutely astounded you that you uncovered, or was fascinated you? What did you uncover that just really blew your mind, so to speak?
Well, I think I'd have to say, weirdly enough, I started with World War II, and that was bizarre enough. Being in the Heliopolis Museum in Egypt was where the secret listeners were housed. Like, what? But I think the thing that really fascinated me was like how people perpetuate the secrecy and the mythology of their fights, their tribal warfare, and in particular, like in Ireland, in Belfast. And I had not seen Belfast until recently, but I knew I had to go there. And when I did, I went to the Black Cab tour, and the man talked about that. It was fascinating because, the divided city. I mean, it's the two groups that are the same, but they think they're not the same. The Michael Ignatieff a few years back, blood and belonging, all this mythology of we belong to this tribe and you're not in it. And we're enemies. Look at the Israelis and the Palestinians, and look at, you name it, the Russians and the Ukrainians. It's going on all around us. So that was pretty fascinating. And I read widely about the Troubles. I read everything from, the respected journalist Simon Winchester, who covered stuff while he was there, and novels, stories. And I read writings by people who were, who did carry out these terrible punishments and killings and so on. People who published that. I read about people who were in the police, and I watched all these BBC TV things. And I've had a lot of trouble getting my head around that. But this is the human condition, right? Like, it just happens to be in a very small place, in a very small city. It's just weird because, Northern Ireland is part of Britain, and yet it's part of Ireland. And, the North and the South, and the history there where the Brits gave land to Scottish settlers in the North, and those people now think, this land is our land. We were dispossessed once, and this is not going to happen again. All these bizarre sort of historical threads that come in there.
It is fascinating. And in listening to you, I didn't ask you this before, but I'm going to ask you this now, is not only do you do research, you've done, so much reading, massive amounts of reading, but you also travel. You just talked about being in Egypt, you've been to Ireland. You've probably traveled what you mentioned, the nationalities in your books, your 3 books, you've probably been to every country to do some research, haven't you?
Not Egypt, alas. No, I think at this stage I probably won't go to Egypt. But, there's plenty written about that, including primary sources, people who were there, women veterans of the war who recruited listeners in Egypt. And Trent Park was one place I went. A friend of mine, a writer friend from my writing group in England, she took me to Trent Park, which just happened to be close to her home. And they were building it. They're building like a Barclay Homes is building, flats or whatever. But this is the place, which was a country house, where they kept the German, high-ranking German prisoners, and they listened to everything they said. They bugged the place from top to bottom, garden, pot plants, you name it, ceilings, everything. And they just let the Germans relax and talk, and they found out a lot from them. But they had listeners in the basement recording this frantically. So I put in The Secret Listener, the book I haven't really finished yet. I know where that book is going, but I put my protagonist in the basement. Barbara is a German woman. She's not German, she's English, but she was born in Germany, came to England age 5. Her parents are suspect because now they're German and the war is on. She's one of the 3 women that came out of Oxford in 1941, when the war was on, and their fates, or the 3 books kind of thing. But actually, the 3rd woman doesn't have a book about her, but never mind that. What was I saying? I was talking about Trent Park. Mm-hmm. So Trent Park was it was just fascinating to be there. And the man, the construction supervisor, who my friend wangled, that we would get a tour of the place. And he said, you see this little sunken place in the ground here where the tulips are blooming. Underneath that is the tunnel. And you see that little pub over there. That's where they used to come in. They would come in and go through the tunnel into the basement to listen, because the basement was closed off. So the Germans had no idea that it was there. And that's where the listeners were recording everything they said. And they did find out quite a lot of information about I think it was the V1 or V2 rockets, among other things. This was useful information for them in terms of, protecting the country.
It's amazing the infrastructure that was in place in order to do that. I mean, it's just to think that was even that somebody conceived that, built that, and now, I mean, it's still there. Probably people can.
Well, it's going to be a museum, you see.
Yeah.
So they're going to have when they built, because, the Brits love their history, right? So when they're building the flats, part of that deal there to develop the land was that they're going to have the museum. So we actually went into the basement where it was pretty dingy basement, wires sticking out of the cement kind of thing.
Could you feel anything, any vibes or anything?
It was I just felt amazement at everything that lies beneath the things we're living now that we take for granted, and all the history that went before and how that forms us. This is my thing, I suppose, the history that forms us, both the seen and known history and the unknown history that lies beneath that,
Yeah, it's for your book right now, the one that you've got, Unspoken History. You mentioned to me earlier that you're looking for representation. What does that mean as a writer?
What that means is I want to get an agent to sell this book to a suitable publisher. And it's not easy to sell your book directly to a publisher now. It's never been easy, but you have to find the right publisher. You have to research all the publishers. But one of my problems is a lot of my scenes are taking place in England and Ireland. And I want my book to be available in those territories, as they call them. So, I might be able to get a Canadian publisher to take it. But one problem is Canadian publishers, a lot of them are kind of small. So if I get them, like one just told me straight goods, you've got 3 books, forget it. I might take one, but I'm not going to publish 3. I would like the 3 to be published by the same publisher, obviously. And the subject matter, I think, would be of interest to British readers, because my people in my writing group who are British, they don't know about this stuff. They're like, wow, that really happened. Newer, younger generations don't know. So yeah. So I'm hoping to get a British agent or a Canadian agent. Somehow I feel an American readers, I don't know if it'd be of as much interest, because the settings are Canada and England. And I feel that those are the places where the book would be most likely to be read. So I want, to get it not only published, but distributed. That's another problem. Because, for instance, I don't know if this is still true, but Iona Wishaw, a British Columbia writer, she's got historic fiction, wonderful books. She's got 10 wonderful books. They're on the BC bestsellers list all the time. But those books are not distributed in the UK. It's a BC publisher. And why? Because so many scenes. She has to do with Russian spies in Lithuania and Britain and Scotland. But I think it's just tragic, because those books would be of great interest, but because of the systems, the publishing, the gatekeepers, and, I don't know much about distributors, but I figure if I get a more established publisher, like in London, a smaller one, then they will have that distribution covered. Of course, here, the publishing industry is mostly in Toronto, so it's a bit of a disadvantage for those of us who live out west. But there is a good publisher in Edmonton. I might apply to them. They just published Francis Peck's book about forest fires in BC. Wonderful, wonderful book. And they may they may take me on. But again, will they take a trilogy? You know, that's so yeah. It's I gotta make myself keep trying. I've had rejections from the really, you know, my top of the list. So I'm just going down the list and looking for more people to ask.
Well, I think just be on, keep on the journey, keep on the journey.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Don't quit, don't give up.
Yeah.
You know, I've done all this work now. Someone has to read it somewhere.
Yeah, somebody will find it. It's just a matter of time. And sometimes it might even be a small one somewhere who's willing to go the extra mile, and there you go. And that just will set you on your road to success. Well, you already have a road to success, but what is it that you love about the writing process?
Well, it's like the stories are inside like a big soap bubble. So this is both the blessing and the curse, because you have to be able to break in, get in there. But once you're in there, like you're in this other world, and you're just like looking around and telling what you see and what happened. And it's just and then you read it like months later, oh my God, did I write that? Like, that's for real. That's a story. You know, that's interesting.
It actually goes back to all these little voices coming in your head. You've got this material that just is there, and it sounds almost like it's an unconscious part of it is an unconscious endeavor.
Oh, a lot of it, I'd say. And I've heard many writers say the same thing. It's not a matter of sitting here and getting an inspiration and getting a whole book. You just show up, and you know, you have faith in the process. And when you start writing, the person that you don't know what they're going to do, then they do things and you write it down. You don't know what they're going to say, and they say things and you write it down. You know what's going to happen, and it happens, and you write it down.
It sounds like an amazing process. So where does writer's block come in? Like this stuff kind of comes, it percolates up, it shows itself. So how does writer's block? I've heard, oh, people have writer's block. I've got writer's block. So has that ever happened to you where you're in the process of doing something and all of a sudden you hit a wall? And then
it's not in that form for me. For me, it's avoidance.
Mm.
Once I get into the bubble, I'm there. But I start, doing the laundry or doing a bit of gardening, or, well, let me load the dishwasher first, because there's a part of me that wants to avoid it, that's kind of scared of it. Because I mean, it's huge and overwhelming, and it takes possession of you. And then it makes you vulnerable, because like those are your words, that's your heart, your soul, you're laying on the page. And people are going to see it, and they're going to judge you, and all of that kind of nonsense, It's all head stuff. It's not important, but it's enough to stop a person.
It's enough to make you go do the laundry instead of sitting there.
Exactly, which is not even my favorite thing to do. I know it has to be done, but.
So what would you say is the biggest challenge you've ever faced in your writing career? Have you ever faced a big challenge or had an obstacle that really took some effort to overcome in your writing career?
I suppose there are certain scenes that are very, hard to write because they're very painful. I read this book, if I could just put my hand on it. I can't, sorry, but it has to do with something called the abortion trail, where women from Ireland, not only the South, but the North, which is actually part of the UK, when they went to Liverpool and to London to get abortions, because it was not allowed in Ireland. It was a very tight religious prohibition, legal prohibition against this. And even though Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and in the rest of the UK that was legal, it was legal. But in Ireland, even in circumstances like where the person has been raped, the person is 14 years old, their life is at stake, still it's not legal. And birth control was not legal. So reading up on all this stuff, and then having to write a scene that related to a character involved in this kind of difficulties, I found that extremely pretty rough stuff. And it's very intimate kind of stuff too, like writing sex scenes, like you're going to put that out in the world? Like, really? You know, that's part of what I say when it's kind of scary, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
So,
I mean, you know, it's one thing to, you know, have shootings and all of this kind of stuff. There's lots of that in the world. There's lots of that on television. There's lots of that in books. But what about like the women's side, like the, you know, the women's stories? They're suffering.
mhm.
Yeah.
And being a woman, that probably would make it that much more difficult because well, I don't know if a man could write about it, but
Yeah, I don't know. You know, there's that old argument. Can you write about what you don't know? It's never say never, because my gosh, you know, people write about, I mean, Alexander McCall Smith writes from the dog's point of view brilliantly, you know. So how do we know? And other, I mean, many writers have written brilliantly, I think, from a woman's point of view, male writers, and the reverse is also true. So I don't know about that, but for anyone to touch that, there again, we're into the secrecy, right? Things that are kept under wraps. So am I really going to open that wrap and expose that? And yet I think it's important that people know these things, especially in our times where you know, women's oppression seems to be on the rise in the so-called, you know, democratic and civilized countries. So
yeah. When it came to writing, I mean, that was an obstacle, a challenge. And so when it came to writing each of these books, right now, the Unspoken History, Habit of Secrecy and Secret Listener, in those books, were there some scenes, and we just talked about difficult scenes. So obviously there were some really difficult scenes to write. When it came to your personal experience growing up and thinking about your dad and thinking about your mom and putting that into, I think that's part of Unspoken History, right?
that's more part of Habit of Secrecy, and
Habit of
that
Secrecy, yeah.
that really informed my understanding of, you know, Rose's father and her, sorry, Caroline's father and uncles. You know, some of them talk about the war all the time, and some of them never talk about it. So which approach works? I mean, they both carry the burden, right? You know, so but another thing that I found, it slipped my mind now. There was another thing that I found very hard to write. Oh yes, when somebody is doing something knowingly, breaking the law, and when somebody belongs to a secret organization, all the pressures of that, a woman that belongs to a secret organization, she's made this decision, you know, at a moment of great stress in her life. She's made it, you know, for both the carrot and the stick reasons. She has no support system around her because her near and dear people are mostly dead. She does have her grandmother, but that's all. Like, the parents are not there. So she makes this decision. She's in this organization, and now she's doing their bidding. So how does she feel? I had great difficulty understanding, how does she feel? Is she aware? Is she blocking it out? Does she feel the guilt as she does things that she knows are illegal? And then to find the moment when she has the realization, oh my God, you know, they're going to kill this person that I've transported across the border, or something along those lines, right? And then, you know, all the fallout from that. So that was hard for me to write, to describe how she feels, because how do I know, right?
Where do you get your descriptions from? And with a character like that, is it that you somewhere deep down something surfaces from your, your subconscious? Does it come to you like an epiphany somewhere? You go to sleep and you wake up, you have it in a dream. Where does that?
Sometimes, like, oh, I know what she did, or I know why she did that. But sometimes it just comes through the process. You just write it down bumblingly, you know, and then later, you know, you go back and rewrite it, and then you show it to your writing group, and they're like, well, what was she feeling at that moment? And then you think about that, and you write that in. I've actually just been doing a bit of that this morning. I've been incorporating some feedback from my writing group in London. The other four women, one is in Bristol, two are in London, and the fourth woman is living in Austria, but she is she's also a British woman. So So these people can also set me straight on like the British factual things, or, you
What,
know,
what,
culture.
Carol, what is your writing process? I mean, right now you talk about belonging to a writing group. Do you have like a special place, any mascots or lucky charms that you hang around to help you tap into your creativity? What's the process that goes on for you every day?
Oh, I don't know, a cup of coffee here on my little heater, which Janie Chang told me about, these little heaters you put by your desk. She's a writer too, a wonderful writer, Vancouver writer. And then I just like sit down and open the last draft and start working. Set the timer maybe for an hour, so that after an hour I get up and go into the kitchen in order to turn off the stove timer, because otherwise I might sit here for 5 hours and not move, which makes me very stiff.
So you actually you regulate your time, how much time you spend.
Sometimes like I can't do it, and other times I just get up. I've been trying lately to do it early in the morning, because a lot of people say that really helps, because your mind hasn't yet absorbed all these impressions and thoughts from the day. Like you get up and you just get there. But what I usually do is I usually get up and I have breakfast, I have my coffee, then I bring it in and I start writing. Quite often it's around 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And I just write until I'm written out. Might be an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 if I'm lucky. And then I look, 3:30, I better eat something, and then I better move my body, get out, have a walk type of thing. But I'm not rigid in terms of my structure. And that's a blessing and a curse, because I love the flexibility, but sometimes a lot of time passes and they don't get much done. But that's okay. I like, somehow or other, I've got the 3 drafts happening. So, and the one is, finished. It's taken years to do it, but from the initial idea and all the research.
When you got the initial idea, did you work on it right away consistently? Or did you have the idea and then let it sit there and then come?
It was a short story first. And it was called Joan, and Joan. And it was about 3 generations of women, and how this mother wants to convey to her daughter what it was like to live in my generation, because when when you and I, Dorothea, look back and think of what we've seen in our lifetimes, the incredible change we've seen. Like, my daughter is almost 40, but like even she has very little idea of what it was like in the 1950s, So it's for that generation, to a certain extent, I think that's still the case. I want to, this is how it was. Mordecai Richler said that. He said, "This was my time and place, St. Urbain Street, Montreal. And I have set myself the task of getting it right. So I have set myself the task of talking about the stories of my era and the things that impinged on my era, which obviously was World War II. Like when I went to school, the 50s, the war was over only for like a decade or so. It's crazy when you think about it. And even in the 60s, the war was only 20 years back then, when I went to university. So yeah. And I wanted to say too, I was looking at Elif Shafak, the Turkish writer, has another book out. She is, I think, one of the great novelists of our time. She says, Doris Lessing, another writer I greatly admired, read all of her work years ago. But she said, Elif Shafak said, Doris Lessing said, the writer's job is to be a mirror to, and she did say that. I think she did the Massey lectures one year in Canada on CBC. And she said, the writer holds the mirror. This is what society, this is what it's doing. But Shafak said she looks back. This is what we've done, what we've been. Because Doris Lessing, of course, was born in Persia, grew up in apartheid South Africa, came to London. But Shafak, who was born in France, is Turkish and also now lives in London. She said, now our job as writers, like we are the light carriers. We have to show what's going on now. Like we have to up our game here. We have to talk about the things that are going on now, but we speak through story. Mm-hmm. And this is our work, and it's so important and it's so valuable.
And so you feel a responsibility. You have a
I guess I do. And it's kind of ironic because I have no idea whether anybody will ever read the books. I've got my beta readers, they're reading it, but if the books don't get published, people say to you, why don't you self-publish? But I don't see it as an option for me, because I don't think it's a good option for fiction writers.
To self-publish?
Self-publish, like you
Mhm,
work with some people and say, okay, here's my manuscript, you fix it up and make it into a book. But then what? There's the distribution problem. Like, if I'm going to go to all the trouble of writing these books and getting them right, then I need them to be published in a way that they can be distributed so somebody can read them somewhere. Maybe the person that most needs to read my book is in Scotland. So, we got to get the book over there. That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, well, I guess
somebody must need the book. If I went to all these troubles to write these books, somebody must need them. The universe is logical that way. Like, there's a,
Yeah, it's true. I think I just was reading something the other day that said, if a person takes responsibility, full responsibility for what they're doing, which is what you're doing, you're taking responsibility to kind of help yourself for being a writer, then the universe will show a way. It'll open up the door. The doors will open. And so I have every confidence a door will open. The publisher will come. And
well,
then,
I have more confidence than I used to. I'm gradually, crawling my way towards saying, yeah, it probably will be published one of these days.
well, it has to. The voices didn't come to you, the desire, this didn't come to you just so it could sit on a shelf. You've been putting it into practice. So it has to go somewhere.
It has to go somewhere, I think.
Yeah.
The energy has to go somewhere.
Yeah. You're also a reviewer. You still review books from time to time. What do you think, what do you do as a reviewer? I was reading on your website that you review books. What do you do as a reviewer, and what do you think would make a compelling read?
Well, it differs from person to person, because some people they love the thriller, the action. I love the language and the slight twist of humor, even in a serious work. So I don't think I'd call myself a reviewer. Like, I just write about the books that I loved and what I loved about them. So, yesterday, after I finished that book, I finished it in 2 days. This book, Janine Cummins, American Dirt. My friend gave me that book, a friend on Vancouver Island, and I looked at it and I read the first chapter and I was like, oh my God, I cannot. It was so grueling, the first chapter. But then my daughter was, reading it with her book club. This is 2 or 3 years ago. And she said, oh, but it's so well written. It's so well written, Mom. It's so beautiful. So I read it and I was completely inspired to write about it, to blog about it. So usually what happens is I'll be reading the book and then I'll feel compelled to notice a passage. So I'll just put a little dot there and I'll put a page number or a phrase or whatever. And then later I write and I incorporate these into my comments about the book. The one I did before that was just a couple of days before, was this book by the Canon Clement Mysteries. This is by a British minister, who had always wanted to be a mystery writer. And he's writing a series about the canon in a small village and the murders, And I also listened to an interview with him through The Guardian. And this guy was saying, my life as a minister has really given me, a lot of insight into the dark side of people and the violence and all of that. And I was like, whoa, who knew? But so and with him, what I loved was the humorous little digs and the humorous little reflections of the culture and the village time and the British culture and the Church of England, and just a little bit of fun with all of that in the midst of the story, which is, the story involves a murder, so that part is not nice. But I really like that. I see that also in Kate Atkinson, I think, is another writer who has that capacity to have the little twinge of humor. And I do love that. And I love the words, I love the words, the way they put the words together, the way they create the images, the way this last writer, she portrays the Mexican town when the migrants get off the train and they see this, and you're there, you see this town at sunset.
Oh, that's that is what makes it a success. And I guess that's why on your website you say you characterize yourself as a lover of words.
I am. I do
Lover
love
of
words.
words.
I've always liked them.
Yeah. From the time that you peeked over the door, right?
That's it. Yeah.
If you could go back to the beginning of your writing career, is there anything that you would do differently? And if so, what would that be?
Thing that I would, I'm not at an age to have regrets. And I think in a way that falls into the category of regrets.
Mm.
I've followed my path to the best of my ability. And if these books that I'm writing now had come out, 20 years ago, they wouldn't have had the same quality. Like my life, I mean, a lot of novelists are old, let's face it, or old-ish, because of the life experience informs the writing. So I think like with my own evolution, the writing can evolve to better places. So I think the books I'm producing now are much better than than if I had kind of rushed them off years ago. And I mean, I had this whole other life, right? I had a career, and now I've been retired for about 10 years, and I've been writing crazily all that time. But I had a busy life. I had a career as an English as a second language instructor at a college. I commuted. I had a daughter. I had my Turkish in-laws living with me, and I had to learn another language. So life was quite busy that time. And I just wrote when I could in between, at the Calabria coffee shop on Commercial Drive, sit there, listen to the opera and write what I could. And then when it was time to go to work, because I was working night shift then, just cap the well and go. Didn't feel good, but I used to journal all the time. And I think, again, the journal, somebody said, when you've written 10,000 words, you're a writer. But I think the journaling also really helped me with just the fluency. I consider myself quite fluent in the sense that if you ask, as you ask me something and my mouth opens and words just keep coming,
Well, it's interesting. So the early parts of your so-called writing career actually set the stage for where you are now.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it's, in different formats when they could. And I did do some, I did get some little things published. I did some little short stories, submitted some things. One time I remember we were going to go to Mexico for a family holiday. And I decided, okay, I'm going to send something off every month. So I sent something off. Okay, I'm off the hook for that month. And lo and behold, it came back and it was accepted, and I was like, whoo, all you have to do is send stuff off. It gets accepted sooner or later, The same with the Stockholm writers, the first, what was it? The first 5 pages contest. Like I was traveling with my choir. We have a choir that sometimes travels. So I was in Spain with this choir, the Vancouver Island Choir. And I'm looking at my computer and I was like, oh my God, I got long listed for the Stockholm writers, and I squeaked and everybody looked at me. What?
Oh, congratulations on that. Yes.
Yeah, that was a real shot in the arm. Stuff like that, like that somebody else can see something in your work. This is a real shot in the arm, Dorothea. It really, really is.
What does it mean when you get long listed? I mean, first of all, somebody recognizes that your work.
So first they make a long list. A bunch of people enter the contest. It's a contest. A bunch of people enter the contest, and then they make a long list. These are possible winners. And then from the long list, they make a short list. And then you're shortlisted. This also happens for things like the Governor General and the Booker. Yes. And then they find the winners.
Wow. And that's quite a kudo. I mean, congratulations on that. As we get ready to wrap up here, if there is one piece of advice that you could give to aspiring writers, what would that advice be? And maybe one piece, 2 pieces of advice. What would that advice be, Carol?
Just, keep faith with the process. Never give up. If you want to get the story, let the story out.
Let the story out, right?
Yeah. And keep working until you're happy with it.
And what happens if you sit there and nothing happens? Because sometimes I've read and I've been told, well, you know what, just go, if you're going to 5 o'clock every day, 11 o'clock every day, you go, sit there until you've written 50 words, until you've written 100 words. What do you do if nothing happens?
Well, then you go out and you walk around the block. This was a very interesting article. This was an exercise that was given to me when I did the writer's studio at Simon Fraser. My mentor was Brian Payton, and he said, I want you to go outside for 15 minutes, walk around this building and see this building through another person's eyes, or see like your surroundings. So I went to look through my brother's eyes, because at that time I was writing memoir about, my early years and so forth. And that's still on the long finger, by the way. The letters to the 20th century, if I ever get to that. By the way, anyway, so I go out and I'm like, okay, now this is Dave. Okay, he's watching the box cars here in the yard shunting across, because this is Harbor Center, right? And he's looking at the cars and the road and the way the buildings are made. And I just really got into it. And then when we came back, we wrote what we'd seen. And that was quite illuminating, because what I would normally look at, I'd be looking at the flowers or the clouds or whatever, the people, but I just focused on what I thought Dave would look at. And it was completely different. Which is, that the opening scene of the Unspoken History is a man waiting for the dinner van to come to the prison to deliver the dinners so that they can escape. They've got this plan made up. The Republican prisoners are going to take over the dinner van. They're going to get the guards' uniforms, get their cars, and they're going to have like a bloodless coup and get out of the most secure prison in Europe, the Maze. And this is real history. This happened. A bunch of prisoners did get out, 38 prisoners, and they only got half of them back. So I've got this prisoner. So this is like, he's a tough boy from the tough area of Belfast. And like, I'm seeing through his eyes. It's a very short paragraph, but I really felt like I had that voice. I don't know if other people would agree, but that's the opening.
That's the opening. So follow your heart, follow your creativity, your inspiration, and get out and walk. If inspiration is heading
move your body, and don't give up. And also, like, let it come in first thing in the morning if you can. Like, I think it's good if you have a little sleep, because when you wake up from a sleep, even if you have an afternoon sleep, you have more access to a different part. Like, you're not in your mundane life as much, so you don't like, oh, I got to do this and I got to do that. So I think that, harvest that time when you're, I suppose, when you're out walking and moving and not on your cell phone, harvest that time to get into the story.
To get into the story and tap into the juice, that creative imagination juice.
Yeah, and ask yourself, why do I write? This is so interesting. Ask yourself, why do I write? And then just start writing. Don't think about it. Just write the answer. I did this exercise, like, I think 3 times in my life, and every single time the answer was almost exactly word for word, like decades apart. Okay. And once you know why you're writing, keep writing, right?
What was the answer?
Because I can't not write was the main answer, I think, because I'm supposed to write. This is what I'm here for. I mean, I don't know.
Well, talking about being a writer, you have some information. Can you tell us about September 28th and the Surrey Muse gathering, and anything else you feel that people should know about you and where you're going to be speaking?
Well, the Surrey Muse gathering is, they've done me the honor of making me the featured writer. They have other artists. They'll have probably a poet and like a visual artist of some sort there. So I have 20 minutes to talk and do a little reading, and then have another 10 minutes to converse with the audience about the work, and then, question and answer. And then other artists will be featured as well. So that goes on from 1 to 4 p.m. on the 28th September in the main library, the Central Branch Library of Surrey Public Library, on the 4th floor, 405.
Will you be speaking anywhere else, or is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your books, about your trilogy series?
I have no scheduled talks or anything of that nature right now. However, I often read at in South Surrey. There's the Turnbull Gallery. They have a reading series there, so I often read there. It's every Thursday, but this is starting again in September. It doesn't go on in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then I like to read there because I like to read and, you know, see the audience reaction, gauge the audience reaction to the words. I also sometimes read for the Writer's Studio, a series. They've been meeting downtown on Franklin Street most recently they've been reading in a bar kind of place. I think it's a brewery, some kind of a brewery. Anyway, so I read there, you know, a few months ago, but I don't have a regular reading circuit really. Maybe I will when my books get published.
When your books get published.
I'm going to hear Frances Peck on about the circuitous journey to publication. I'm going to hear her on at the New Westminster Public Library next Saturday. So
I know that you'll get published. I just wish you incredible success. I mean, what an accomplishment to do a trilogy, and just listening to you, all the ideas, because I think, oh, gee, wouldn't it be great to be a writer? I don't have any burning desire, but it amazes me where ideas come from, how they percolate, how voices sometimes for people who are compelled, as you say, you can't do anything else. Really, writing is what you need to do. And that, to me, I think is just, that's amazing. That's like your purpose in life.
it is. And if I'm away from it too long, I don't do well. I need to write. It's important.
Yeah. I thank you so much, Carol, for joining me today and sharing all these insights, answering the different questions. And for people out there, if you're in the Surrey, in the Vancouver area, or you plan on just taking a flight, coming here to listen to Carol, by all means, it's September 28th. And it's at the City Center branch in Surrey, room 405 from 1 to 4. Come listen to Carol. Check out her website. And Carol, what's your website? What's your email? Just share.
caroltulpar.ca is my website. And my email is ctulpar@gmail.com.
@gmail.com. Yeah, do check out, pop her an email if you have any questions. Fascinating talking to you. Looking forward to the publication of the trilogy. So thank you so much, Carol. To everybody else and to Carol, wishing all of you mountains of success.